your mentor? What was the core and the essence of what you took from him, learned from him?
As a teacher, what he was remarkable at, unlike a lot of other teachers that I saw, is that he didn't really come at you with sort of an agenda of this is what film is, or this is how you should make films, or this is how you should learn how to make films, which was very unusual to see. And what he was gifted at was essentially being able to put himself in your shoes and kind of adopt whatever filmmaking problem you had set out for yourself and help you make your film actually better, which might sound sort of simple, but in reality is very hard, because most people, whether they become an accomplished filmmaker, whether they become an accomplished film teacher, accomplishment in film tends to be something that's very personal. So usually someone's good at doing the thing that they got good at, which is why they got the job to teach, or so on and so forth, which means that they might not be so good at dealing with someone who's making something that's totally different. In our program at Harvard, you could do anything you wanted. So you really were thrown a lot of different pitches as a teacher. You had to kind of make sure everybody was making good films or better films than they started out making. And he was amazing at that, and was also quite a charismatic and charming teacher. So I would not say actually that there's any kind of specific mission or assignment or any kind of credo that he had. What he did have and what he gave me, which was very special, was he just sort of very simply said, well, I think one day you can, I think you can probably do this professionally, which as a young undergraduate student, that gives you probably about 10, 15 years of confidence to go for it. So to really sort of be the first grown-up who looked at what I was doing and said, you can probably do this, that in itself meant the world. And really, built that relationship that would lead me to want to do this with him, in a way. In fact, actually, when I graduated from school, we applied together. They had a grant where a teacher and a student applied together, and we were going to make a film together where I was going to travel to Spain. It was a documentary about Orson Welles' youth when he spent some time in Spain. When Dick got sick, that project sort of unraveled, and I was searching for something to do next. And then this came rather sort of innocently. Susan called me up and said, oh, his Avid editing computer is broken. Could you come over and help me fix it? And there was no idea to make a movie. It was literally just fix the computer. And up came this project. I said, well, what's this footage? And she said, well, we're not really sure what it was. What are you doing for the rest of the afternoon? And so I watched some footage, showed her a couple things. She said, oh, wow, what are you doing for the rest of the week? And it really grew that way. And so the feeling of wanting to come back for another week, wanting to come back for another month, wanting to come back for another year, really was born out of that close relationship I had with him, and sort of sense that I still wanted to make a film with this guy, even if he was unavailable for more shooting.
So there's very little in the film about him being a professor. And I was just curious, is that more a conscious decision on your part, or is that a result of just not really having much footage? Because I assume that's how you knew him best as a professor, but it's just sort of absent mostly in the film.
There was, it was about 4.5 minutes of, we're dealing with like 300, actually really 300 hours of footage. In that there was maybe about 4 minutes that he shot at SUNY Purchase, a university in upstate New York, of being in a classroom and cleaning up after. There was a time when I tried to get that in there, didn't sort of make the cut. But no, in general, what was in the footage that he left didn't really go there. And in fact, there were huge parts of his life that didn't make it into the film. There was, as I was sort of alluding to, he was a remarkably charming guy, which is not really there in the footage as much as you might think. And he was known almost as sort of a wasp Woody Allen amongst his friends, remarkably charming. The sense that he was having affairs with women, in reality it was many, many, many more affairs, and it was because he was, in fact, so charming, and yet every time there was somebody filming him, or he was narrating something, and he kind of got in the groove of being funny, he told the person to turn the camera off, he turned the machine off. He didn't take the funny side of himself seriously. And I think part of that outgoing side of him is connected to his teaching. And so he also sort of didn't take that part of his life as seriously in terms of making something autobiographical. So what was serious, or what was appropriate for this film, was something about the landscape, something about this community, which in itself was such a filmmaking problem that he couldn't figure it out. But that was one of the issues that he was confronted with, because when I was starting to work on this, I was thinking, well, this guy's so funny, this guy is such a great teacher, this will be easy to make a film about him. And then I actually got through all the 300 hours of footage, and I'm like, he's not really funny in here, there's nothing, all the things that I assumed would be there weren't, which sort of made it 10 times harder than I ever thought it would be to make this thing. Is the short answer.
The narration that you started with, was it taken from his journals, or was it something that you wrote just from watching the images and the footage and taking it from context? Like when you kind of start narrating man's voice?
He did have a diary in his 20s. The part where I start in is basically when he's about 30. So the idea that he had written a diary was certainly there, and some of the footage, some of the sort of recorded narration that he had made, he kind of did in a, we'd say like June 1988, and so he had a sort of narrativeness to that. And so I really just ran with that, but aside from that inspiration, there were no entries, notes, or anything pertaining to any of the footage that I had. So the content had to be imagined, invented, and that was done basically by developing a close relationship with Susan, with Noni, with all his friends. There's no public record of him. He's not a sort of famous film director where I could go to a library and kind of learn about him. So everybody that's in the movie was basically my source of information. So it was kind of a delicate dance of eliciting stories from everybody to kind of figure out how to sort of piece this story together.
And I'm curious about two things. Will your next film be documentary or other? And are you still designing ties?
I was, it'll be other, it would be the next film. And I did design this necktie. I guess when I started working on this film, I guess my thesis film actually in college, I designed a necktie for the crew that, as a souvenir for the guys that had worked on the film. I had never done that, I just thought it was a good joke. And my friends from Harvard who were graduating into real jobs at banks and law firms saw it and said, "That's a really nice tie, could I buy one from you?" And I just started selling these ties, and that was a really good way to pay the rent as a starving filmmaker. And lo and behold, as I was editing this film, working actually in Dick's loft where you see Wally in the beginning, where you see those beautiful windows, that's where, there weren't actually windows, but in a smaller room in the back, I was working there for those years. And I started actually sort of laying out ties on the table, and people would come and I would be editing and sell a couple ties. And that was how things went. And now this is sold at Bergdorf Goodman and Barney's and Colette in Paris and lots of stores in Tokyo. And so, wasn't part of the plan, but that's where we are now.
For all your documentaries.